everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to jump right in. So, Salman, just kind of riffing off the video, I'm going to tap into the film nerd in you.
Yes.
And when did you first see Hitchcock's Rear Window? Because it seems to play a huge role. It's not only mentioned in the book, but it feels like it kind of maybe inspired the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it probably when I was somewhere around when I was at college, so in my early 20s, I must have seen it. And at that time, I knew next to nothing about New York City. I'd never been here. And when I got here, I discovered that almost everywhere is Rear Window. That, everybody's looking out of their back window into somebody else's back window, and so that was interesting. And then I actually discovered that the place where Hitchcock had kind of seen what I think this, in the film it's a stage set. I don't think it's a real place. It's a set. But it was based on a place that he visited on Christopher Street, which was about 100 yards away from where my book's set, which is set in this secret garden, which I guess many of you may know about in the Village. That's between like Bleecker and Houston and McDougal and Sullivan. Inside there's a secret garden. And I thought that was just a wonderful setting because it's almost like a stage set. It's almost like an amphitheater with all these people looking out, and the action of the main characters, can play itself out in this secluded space. So it became, and then I did think about Rear Window because everybody's spying on everybody else.
Well, I'm really interested because, yes, everyone's looking into this place. Did you get a chance to go to this garden yourself? Because it's a place where very fancy people have their houses, and I'm wondering if any fancy person invited you over one day.
Yeah, I know fancy people.
Who did you go? Who lives there?
Well, the thing is that strangely, when those gardens were built, those houses on McDougal and Sullivan, they were built by a developer who wanted them to be affordable housing for artistic people, because he was worried even then, in the 19th century, that people like that were being forced out of the Village by prices. So they were built as cheap housing. Now they go for like $15 million. And well, I knew two people. Actually, the people to whom the book is dedicated, the painter Francesco Clemente and his wife Alba, that are good friends of mine, and they actually have the house that Bob Dylan used to live in.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first introduction. And then there's another writer friend of mine, Wendy Gimble, who also had a house across the way on the Sullivan Street side. And so, yeah, I mean, I've been going there for a long time. But it was one of those kind of light bulb moments when I suddenly thought, this is the place to put the story. Also because, there's in this book, there's like a private story and a public story. There's the story of these characters and the Golden family and their family tragedy. And then around them is, the larger tragicomedy of America. And I just thought the physical shape of it, to have this enclosed space in which the private story could take place, and then all around that would be the crowd, of everything else. So I just like that as a shape.
Well, it's interesting because you mention kind of this idea of bubbles, and in our media now, we're always talking about like the liberal bubble or this bubble, who knows? And you've talked really eloquently about, well, who is in the bubble? Are we in the bubble in New York, or are people who don't believe in evolution in their own bubble?
Yeah, I think that's the bubble. The bubble that doesn't believe in science and has kind of social views which feel like they're out of the Stone Age. That seems to me to be the bubble. There's a bad bubble.
Well, because Renee's parents are these professors.
Yeah.
And they say to their son, you are the bubble boy.
The boy in the bubble, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Which I just found, in the context of what's going on now, a really interesting idea.
Well, their view of the bubble is very specific, that it's not just a liberal bubble. It's actually not even a New York bubble, because Manhattan, yes, in the bubble. Brooklyn, certain areas of Brooklyn in the bubble. Queens, definitely not in the bubble. Staten Island, forget about it.
Oh.
So it's a very specific bubble.
People want to be the bubble.
Yes, who would not want to live there? So, I mean, of course, it's done for comic purposes. I mean, in fact, in the story, Renee is this young filmmaker who narrates the novel, and his parents are this rather kind of sweet, I think, couple of academics who kind of finish each other's sentences and have been having the same conversation with each other all their lives. So, and they have this view of New York as the bubble, but you want to be in the bubble because you don't want to be in, Kansas. They say to him, you wouldn't last 5 minutes in Kansas. And it's true, he wouldn't. I can't remember if I put it in the book. Sometimes you can't remember what you leave in and what you take out.
That's good, you want the bits that aren't in the book.
Yeah?
The other bits.
There's a bit where they're talking about how in Kansas, even the boards of education don't believe in evolution and so on, thus proving that Darwin was wrong because it proves that the fittest don't always survive.
Oh. I hope no one's from Kansas here, but it's a very
Kansas.
lovely state. Well, let's talk about the Goldens, because they are really the crux of this novel, and they're kind of audacious, or particularly Nero, the kind of, not the patriarch of the family. But I'm really interested in identity and how you kind of really write into that. And it's almost because the Goldens are incredibly wealthy, we kind of forgive them their, eccentricities. But also this idea that in America you can be, the idea of reinvention.
Reinvention, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a great theme. It's a great theme of American literature for a start, But this is a family that, as the reader quickly discovers, so I'm not giving too much away, that the place they've come from is India, the city of Bombay, my old hometown. And they're clearly getting away from something very shady in their past. So their motivation for this enormous act of reinvention, of changing their names, of concealing the past, of refusing to admit where they come from, etc. In their case, it's not like the normal immigrant thing of people wanting to come here and be new people in a new country. It's darker than that. And so there is this big secret, and of course, eventually, the question is whether can you escape your past, or does it come after you? And well, I think in a novel it almost always does come after you, because it would be a pretty rotten novel if I said, here are these people with a really terrible secret from the other side of the world, folks, but never mind that. So obviously it blows up in their face. But from that center, the subject of our kind of obsession with identity issues, becomes quite central to the novel. And different kinds of identity issues, religious identity, gender identity, all sorts of things. And the book becomes kind of about that in part. I invented this thing. One of the characters works at a place on the Bowery, of course, called the Museum of Identity. And I was rather proud of that. And in fact, several journalists, including New Yorkers who came to interview me, said they had to look it up.
Did you? I Googled it.
They had to check that it didn't really exist. Well, it doesn't really exist, but I suspect it will soon, don't you? I mean, it's given the preoccupation we have with the subject, somebody's going to have that idea. And then I want my cut when they do that. But anyway, so the novel goes into all these different understandings of the word, because it's really an umbrella term that contains national identity. What is it to be an American now, especially now? And as I say, gender and religion and self. The question is, what do we understand by the self? At a moment when we are being asked to understand ourselves more and more narrowly, because one of the things the novel has traditionally done is to refuse that idea that human beings are not simple. They're not like one thing. They're complicated and contradictory and rich, and so I worry about this pressure on us to narrow our self-definitions. The book's sort of about that too. But really, it's also a thriller, because there is this secret. And one of the things I've never really written a book which had a kind of thriller-ish shape to it. And one of the interesting things about that, writing it, is that you kind of have to write it backwards. Because of course I have to know what the secret is that I'm not telling you. And then I have to judge how I drip it into your ears, exactly what do I tell people when, and sometimes misdirection. One of the great things about, Agatha Christie is the way in which the plots don't just gradually tell you what's happening, they also make you think something's happening, whereas actually something else is happening, And this is what Hitchcock had a wonderful term, he called it a MacGuffin. A MacGuffin, because there's a character in one of his films called MacGuffin. But a MacGuffin is, when introduced into the story, is you think, oh, it's about that. But actually, it's not about that, it's about that. So making you look in the wrong place.
So if you wrote this as a thriller, we have the golden story, which you knew. Am I assuming that you predicted the outcome of the election?
Yes, because that's the thing I can do. Yeah, just apply here if you want all elections predicted. No, the truth is that really the way the book was written, almost entirely written before the election, and I had to do a little bit of tweaking afterwards. But really, what René is this idealistic young American guy who is very anguished in some ways about the division in his country, about the rift in society, and really in a way that's what he's thinking about, and that's the theme of the public part of the book. And I really think of Trump as being an effect more than a cause. That's to say, if he didn't exist, that rift would still be there. And if he were to disappear tomorrow, that rift would still be there. So, and yes, he's good at exaggerating it and making it worse, perhaps, but it was there anyway. And so, given that that's what I was writing about, the actual election result wasn't that important, because even if the election had gone the other way, that rift would still be there, so yeah, I did, but what is weird, though, is that I didn't think he was going to win. He didn't think he was going to win. Nobody thought he was going to win. And even right up to Election Day, I was, anxiously hoping that the other thing would happen. But my book understood that the kind of dynamic of the story in the book insisted that thing was good, that this thing, the thing that happened, was going to happen. And so there is this thing that sometimes the work can be wiser than the writer. The work can know something which the writer is trying very hard to resist knowing. So yeah, in that sense, the book was prophetic, but I wasn't, because I was telling people on Election Day that it was going to be fine, we're going to have a woman president. So I was totally wrong. But that thing knew.
So the Green Man does insert himself, and you also call him the Joker.
The Joker.
And I'd love to talk about, I don't know if you all agree, I feel like we're in a time where we have real villains.
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't have villains before. And I know your book is very Shakespearean, but it definitely captures this moment of I didn't know we had these adversaries that had faces now.
Well, one of the strange things is how large and grotesque the figures of power have become now. And one of the things I thought, the words Donald Trump don't occur in the novel. But there is a character, a sort of Trumpy character. What I thought is, in a deck of playing cards, the only two cards that don't behave properly are the Joker and the Trump. And I thought, well, I don't want the Trump, so I'll have the Joker. So there is a character with very white skin, which he likes, and unusually colored hair, which it being the Joker is green, who runs for president and wins. And somebody in the novel says that this is not an age of heroes. I think it's right. There's no Batman, but there is a Joker. So we live in an age without the hero, but with the villain.
I guess, where are our heroes?
Well, exactly. Absent, in some other place, finally realizing that they were fictional to begin with.
But also, The Golden House is the title of your book, and it's the Golden Family. Can you tell us the origin of a golden story? Because I feel like now that I know what it is and you're going to reveal to everyone, I feel like we're in a moment of a tall tale.
Yeah. Well,
We're
this is the thing.
inside
It comes from ancient Rome. There's this in somewhere in the histories of Pliny. There's a little bit where he says that on the street corners of Rome, there would be oral storytellers, who were trying to drum up business. And what they would cry to the passers-by is they would say, "Give me a coin and I'll tell you a golden story." And what they meant by that was a kind of tall story, a shaggy dog story, a fantasticated story. And so that was, that I had that idea in my mind. I'd read that kind of years ago, and it sort of stuck there. And then I thought, well, this kind of is that. It's a story which is so extraordinary that you couldn't make it up. I remember it's one of the classic truth is stranger than fiction moments, and I remember like a few weeks ago, my friend Ian McEwan was in town, and we had dinner together, and we were talking about this, and we were saying, if either of us had written down the plot of what has actually happened in America and taken that to our publishers, they would have said, go back and think about it more seriously because that's impossible. That's totally implausible. And so we live in this moment in which the implausible is true, and the impossible thing is what happened. And not just in America, it's what happened in the UK as well with the whole Brexit nonsense. So everywhere you look, impossible things are happening. Yeah.
Well, usually I know so many writers, if you are a writer, people say, take distance, write this thing and then put it in a drawer and you'll come back to it. But, I've read or heard, and you can tell us how what it's like to write up against time.
Again, the present moment.
Yeah.
It is something you're not supposed to do. When you're being taught creative writing, which mercifully I never was, you are told, yes, that you need objectivity and distance and you need perspective, and all of that, means that you have to wait before writing about things. But A, I'm not good at doing what I'm told, and B, I think it's quite exciting to take that kind of dangerous. It's quite right. It is a dangerous thing to do, because if you do it wrong, then your book becomes irrelevant in 5 seconds, like yesterday's newspapers. So it is very dangerous. There's a wonderful, somewhere in Hemingway's bullfighting stuff, there's an image he uses where he says how the great matadors, the great bullfighters, work closest to the bull. That's to say, if the bull is over there, it's not that skillful. When the bull is just grazing your thigh as it goes by, then it's very exciting, but it's also very dangerous because you can get gored and killed. And I thought that writing up against the present moment felt like that, felt like working very close to the bull. And that if you do it right, then you capture the moment, and then people now reading the book can have recognition pleasure. They can have the pleasure of saying, yeah, this is how it is. And hopefully people in the future, if there are people in the future who read novels, those people can say, oh yeah, this is how it was. And you know, there are many writers, great writers, who have managed to do that. I mean, Fitzgerald did that. Edith Wharton did that in an interesting way. I mean, James Baldwin did that. I mean, Another Country is a book of that sort, you know, written about the exact moment in which the book is written. And I thought this is kind of, it is scary to do it, but it's interesting scary, you know, to try and make that happen, to make that work. So yeah, this story of the Golden Family I actually had in my head for quite a long time. That's not something I just thought about. I had it in my head for many years, actually. But then to set it in this moment, which is right now, you know, required a certain amount of, you know, fancy footwork. Because first of all, it means you have to be able to respond to things that are happening in order to try and capture the flavor of a moment. You know, which can be something as big as the election, or something as small as the cronut. you know what I mean?
Small and delicious.
Yeah. So, I mean, you need all that stuff. You know, you need to be able to just capture what's in the air and make the moment out of it. You know, and I mean, you'll have to tell me if you think I did it right or wrong. But that was the intention, was to try and capture a moment in a way that wasn't just transitory. You know, to capture the underlying thing of the moment as well as the surface.
I mean, there was, rereading the book in preparation for this, just this week, I felt saddened at how specifically well you had kind of captured what has just happened in New York the last few weeks with these attacks, you know,
Yeah.
just a few streets away. And not to give too much away about the book, but was it important for you to address that violence as well?
Well, the random violence of our time, you know, the fact that a man with a gun can point it out of a window in a hotel in Vegas and start shooting at any time, at anyone, you know. That kind of random gun violence that apparently it's never the right time to discuss is something I wanted to write about. So actually there's a scene, doesn't give too much away, but there is a scene in the novel which takes place on Halloween in those gardens where there's a little Halloween party. And outside in the big Halloween, in the parade and all that, there's a crazy guy with a gun. You know, I mean, and the fact that on that same day in real life, something of that sort took place is just a shocking coincidence.
I mean, on a more positive note,
Yeah.
because get your questions ready, because
Yeah.
we'll have questions in about 2 minutes. We had elections last night.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about where the country is going? Do you feel like we may...
Well,
yes, there are villains,
yeah.
but...
I mean, it was a moment, first moment of hope, you know, for a year, maybe. And, well, for exactly a year, actually.
Yeah.
You know, and, I mean, in my optimistic moments, I don't believe that Trump is the new normal. You know, I do think that in so many ways, what happened, the margins were so small, and I mean, we know about the popular vote, but never mind that, just even within the game as played, you know, the margins were so small that you can see, anybody can see that that's reversible. It doesn't need that big a swing in the public's voting intentions to reverse that. And so I think it's possible. I think it's doable, you know. And I do think that those of us who are not of a Trumpic disposition need to get smarter. You know, I think the left did a great job of destroying itself in this election. You know, the circular firing squad, which is the famous characteristic of the left. But I also think, you know, I don't think Hillary Clinton was a great candidate, and I think it was a rotten campaign. So we've got to get smarter about all that. And one of the things I really think is it's time for a big generation shift. You know, Hillary's 70, I'm 70, I'm not running. You know, Trump is, 72? It's time, I think, for the next people.
Yeah.
You know?
Often.
Yeah.
Woo!
And I think if you look at what's happened in Canada with Justin Trudeau, or in France with Emmanuel Macron, you can see the benefit of new thinking, younger voices, etc. And I think this country needs that. I think it really does, you know. And I mean, I don't know where they're coming from, but I hope some of those voices emerge quickly.
Well, hopefully we get this message to them. And I know that they were kind of activated yesterday. But okay, we are at question time. We have very little time, so let's go.
Short questions.
Short questions.
Raise your hand, we'll bring you a mic.
There's the mic.
Oh, there's a question down here.
Somebody got a mic? Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
Someone have a question?
Yeah.
You've played yourself in at least one movie and television show recently. What was it like working with Larry David? Was it great fun?
Well, you know, I'm glad we're getting down to the serious stuff. No, I mean, it was 2 days of enormous fun. I mean, I had met him a couple of times before, but I didn't know him very well, you know, and he just got in touch with me out of the blue and said, "So I've written this thing, and you want to be in it?" And I said, "Well, what thing would that be?" and I said, "Could you send me a script?" And he said, "Well, the problem is there's no script because it's all improv." And I said, "Well, can you tell me what happens?" And he talked to me for about 3 minutes, and I said, "Yeah, that sounds funny. I'll do it." You know, so it was like that. And I literally arrived in LA to do it, having not seen a script. I mean, it's not just improv; it's guided improv. You know, so because they you know where they want the scene to get to, and what story the scene is supposed to tell. But how you do it, that's up to you. So they'll say like, "Okay, so Larry's going to sit there, and you're going to sit there, and he's going to say something like this, and you're going to really dislike it." You know, like he's going to say that he wants Jason Alexander to play you in the musical, and you're going to really dislike it. That's a go. Which is made funnier by the fact that the Jason Alexander character in Seinfeld was, of course, the character based on Larry David. You know, so yeah, I mean, there are moments of which I'm proud. I mean, because you know there are no lines, so I more or less made up the line about the fatwa being like sexy pixie dust.
That was so good.
That's my line. So anyway, it was just fun. It was just, I mean, who would not? Except that, of course, afterwards, oddly not before, but afterwards, I got very nervous about the fact that I might be the only person in Curb Your Enthusiasm who's not good.
No.
And so that was worrying.
All right. We have another question over here.
Where?
Here.
All right, okay, yes.
Do you think that the writing community has been sufficiently vocal in raising the alarm against the war that's being waged against journalists in this country?
Say that again? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear what was the
I
question
said,
again?
do you think that writers,
Yeah.
including novelists, are sufficiently vocal in raising the
Oh.
alarm?
About the attack on journalism?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I've been doing it, you know. I mean, I think, you know, I think writers' organizations like PEN are very active in that right now. But I do think it's extraordinary and not accidental and carefully planned that this attack on the press is taking place, because basically, if a leader can convince a population that the people whose job it is to bring them information are lying to them, then he is able to say the most dangerous thing, which is, "I am the truth." You know, and that is the standard path to authoritarianism. That's the first step. So in order to become authoritarian, you have to demolish people's faith in the news media. And so in that sense, I mean, I don't know that how well up on European history the 45th president is. But I think around him, you know, people like Bannon and so on, they certainly knew what they were doing. And this was deliberate. And yes, it needs to be spoken up against. And I, myself, as I've been saying around the country during this book tour, I defend the New York Times against the charge of fake news all the time, except when it's reviewing my books.
That's perfect. Guys, unfortunately, we have to wrap it up, even though we would keep Salman for hours. Thank you for such brilliant questions.
Thank you.
And thank you.